So, so if I could ask you to mute yourselves for the time being, that would be handy. Not you, Lee, obviously. So Lee and I have known each other for many years now. I can't remember when the first time I ever met you, Lee. It would have been, did I come on? I came on your esoteric occult tour of the Egyptian galleries at the British Museum, but I can't remember now whether that was before or after you did an Explorers Club for me in St. Leonard's.
In my mind, I
Yeah.
remember that I came and did the Explorers Club first.
Okay. Oh,
And
you did mesmerism at the Cave Gallery. I remember
yeah,
that was
yeah.
a
Yes,
legendary event.
yes.
So that would have been about 2012 or something like that.
Probably,
Yeah.
yes. Yeah.
So Lee and I have kind of kept in touch over the years, and our interests are obviously very similar. We're both interested in the mysteries in ancient magic, ancient religion, and we've just been discussing the mysteries of Elefsina, and we've both spent a lot of time in Greece. And as Lee was just saying, we seem to go to the same places all the time, but miss each other by not very long period. So Lee, would you like to introduce yourself and tell everyone what you're up to these days and what you have been up to until these days?
Oh, right. Okay. So, let's see. So I've been working hard at these sort of working with the mysteries in one way or another, whether it's working with inner traditions or whether it's working in a way where I have some aspects of it that I can teach in the external world for about the last 25 years or more. I would say more now. Um, I in a nutshell, what I'll say is I got interested in NLP, in hypnosis. Um, but as I was describing in a recent interview with one of our mutual friends here, Darren, I actually did an interview with him recently, and he asked me, "Where do you think this all really started?" I said, "Well, basically, it started after I'd gone for a walk." And I did a very, very long walk and discovered by doing that walk, by interacting with the land, by just doing simple things like waking up, going to sleep, walking, sleeping every day under the sun and the moon and the stars, managed to start to form a relationship with what I might call the magnetic field that surrounds my whole body and actually is sort of to some extent fed into by the earth. And then to some extent, you interact with it with your own magnetic field back to the earth. That actually, doing this walk made it very clear to me that you reach certain states of trance quite naturally by doing things like walking in a rhythmic pace, breathing in a rhythmic pace. It can transport you into some quite unusual places and some quite healing places as well. Um, I got more and more interested in how these trance states could be used. So I formally started training in NLP and hypnosis, and then got involved with working magnetically about, oh gosh, I'm starting to lose track now. Probably about 2010, around about that time, 2009, 2010. Started getting involved in working magnetically. But to some extent, this was the thing. I was already doing that. I was discovering that I already had some kind of an ability to work magnetically, especially with other people. Um, so yeah, I just got more and more involved in doing it as a profession.
And how did that lead you to say, for example, your tours of the British Museum, which I think are kind of like cult now, like
Oh,
everyone I
right.
speak to knows you from these tours.
Mm. Yeah, well, I was living close to the British Museum for about 8 years, and I was regularly going in there every other day and just spending time sitting around some of the statues and some of the figures, and started to notice, very similar to a lot of the other stuff that I've just described to you, started to notice that some of these objects had quite distinct and characteristic magnetic qualities, which ebb and flow with the lunar cycles.
Hmm.
So I kind of got a bit obsessed with going in there and checking all of these things out. And it wasn't just that. I was able to stand in front of some of these things, and they would literally impart information to me on various different levels. I was never interested in the archaeological history of these things. I was more interested in the way that the symbolism itself just unfolds if you can come into contact with these figures. And another thing I noticed was the fact that a lot of these figures seem to be carved in stone for perpetuity, so that we can actually access some of the forms that they're making. So, for example, some of the stances that you find them in, like the stance of Pitar and so on. So they're almost like saying, "Do as we do, try out, give it a go. Try out what we're doing, and if you do, you'll be pleasantly surprised." Especially if you're working with present moment awareness in the process.
There's one object that I remember you pointing out on our tour, the libation bowl of Hathor, and that's something that I've become quite obsessed with myself. And I remember the quality of it is amazing. It's something I always go and spend time with when I'm there. And then it has a kind of slightly throwaway descriptive tag,
Mm.
which a lot of the objects in the British Museum do have because they haven't been
Yeah,
updated very regularly.
yeah.
And one of the things that I realized about it recently, because I started to learn hieroglyphs during lockdown and I got very interested. I mean, you were my inspiration for starting
Mm.
to properly
Mm.
study hieroglyphs because
Right.
I
Mhm.
found that tour of the British Museum so eye-opening and I saw everything very differently after that. And I
Yeah.
was desperate to be able to read some of the inscriptions, but understanding the essence of some of, say, like the determinatives or some of the like literal symbolic hieroglyphs that don't necessarily have a phonetic meaning already revealed quite a lot. But the Hathor's libation bowl um, is such a beautiful, perfectly made thing. And it came to my mind recently because during Explorers Egyptology, one of my lectures was on mirrors, the history of mirrors. And we had an Egyptologist, Joan Backhouse, talk about mirrors and symbolism of mirrors in ancient Egypt. And what strikes me about that libation bowl now is that it's the glyph of the solar disk. It has a smaller
Yes.
circle in the
Yes.
center. So
Yeah.
I had an idea that this could have been used and it could at least have had a double function of being a water mirror, because if it was filled with some sort of liquid, I mean, it says it's a libation bowl, but that kind of doesn't really mean anything. It's just an example of some sort of furniture. But I contacted the British Museum and I said something about the possibility that this could ever be used as a water mirror or could be used for divination. And the curator there said that the Egyptians didn't practice hydromancy. They didn't practice divination using water or oil or anything like that, which is kind of crazy because I'd also had a lecture from another Egyptologist that was all about water divination and the fact that
Right.
obviously they did practice every conceivable form of divination in
Right.
Egypt. So it's very interesting how you get, I've always been impressed, and I think it's a great thing that the British Museum let people do their off-piste weird tours of the British Museum and that it's
Hmm.
free for everyone to go to, despite the fact that they've obviously nicked most of their stuff or paid a pittance for most of the stuff that they have in there. The
Mm.
fact that it's free is its one saving grace, I would say, because
Hmm.
it's
Hmm.
certainly, growing up in a working class family, I was in museums and art galleries all the time in London as a kid, and it was like the
Yeah.
best education I ever had. So
Yeah.
uh I always just remember you really pointing out Hathor's bowl and the fact that it had this like amazing feeling and resonance, and every time I would go I would like stand by it and
Hmm.
try to feel its energy somehow. But is that something that you think reacts with moon cycles as well?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I've tested it out on numerous occasions. Going there on new moons, going there on full moons, and and you definitely get a different level of vibration coming from that bowl on those occasions. I usually find it strongest at the new moon, less strong, funnily enough, at the full moon. That's how I discovered. And there was another one. I don't know if you remember, but there's another libation bowl quite similar to it. And it always, in comparison, it always felt incredibly dead. Like there was just nothing coming from that bowl at all. And it obviously isn't as perfect as the other one either. It's quite sort of misshapen and kind of a
Mm.
bit battered.
I think, is that the
And
one up by the offering tables?
yeah, the one up near the offering tables, yes. But that one, like I was saying, it always felt really dead. I have to say, in the last year, it seems to be coming back to life, or it seems
Mm,
to
that's
be
interesting.
seems
I
to
was
be
going to go to the British
generating.
Museum a couple of days ago, but the queue was the biggest queue I've ever seen in my
Yeah,
life. And it's the only time when I haven't gone because the queue's been so big, but I would have been waiting outside for like 2 hours in the rain. Um,
yeah.
but yeah, I'd be interested to try that out next time I see it. I mean, I think it's really interesting because we're so used to things being made quickly and easily here.
Hmm.
It really hit me how the extra effort that's required to put that small circle on the inside
Mm.
turns it into a glyph for the sun. And in ancient Egypt, mirrors were a symbol of rebirth. They're often shown
Yeah,
in postpartum scenes, for example, and they have this relationship with dreams as well, because dreams are often represented as being in this kind of mirror realm. And
yeah,
so it speaks a little to me also of an ancient Egyptian concept of sort of transmigration of the soul, that
yeah.
a new soul is coming into life.
Yeah, so, I mean, the thing you described about it being like a water mirror was actually what I got myself when I went there many, many years ago, like to the actual place. I remember seeing like a group of in a meditative vision that I had while standing there, which happened to me with quite a few of those objects. That particular one, I know this, this may sound a little sort of out there to some people, but because it was a Hathor mirror, a Hathor bowl, I actually saw a group of priestesses using it to divine the life of a newborn baby, washing the afterbirth off a newborn baby.
Mm.
So it was actually used as divination with candlelight or oil lamp, lights in water, actually looking at that between state, divining the where the child had come from and where it may be going to.
That's interesting. I have a similar idea with regards to um, the relationship that it probably had with birth,
Hmm.
because that's a symbol that you see in most postpartum scenes, and Hathor's obviously associated with protecting women in
Yeah.
labor and things like this as well. So
These things are very difficult to talk about. I mean, like when say for example we're describing some of the hieroglyphs, we look at them and they're just two-dimensional. But there's a certain state of mind that we need to get ourselves into, where we begin to see them beyond the two-dimensional representations, because that's actually what a lot of these things are trying to get at.
yeah, I've thought a lot about this. When I started to learn hieroglyphs,
Mm.
my sort of interest in the mysteries and my ideas about learning to kind of embody or perceive these ancient perceptions shifted a lot, because I think there is something about a hieroglyphic writing system that has a almost holographic quality to it, because
Yeah,
once you
yeah.
fully understand one glyph, or you approach understanding one glyph, it presents this kind of multi-dimensional view of everything. And one of the things that I've considered is, because hieroglyphs are obviously representing real things of the world, those people that were literate in hieroglyphs would have seen configurations of certain real things in the world, which would mean
Yeah,
the world was talking to them, which could be the
absolutely.
voice of God. So that's like an amazingly different way of seeing the world. Before we came online, Lee and I were chatting about the ancient Greek language. And the more I learn about and the more I study the sleep temples and the ancient Greek religion, the more I recognize that the ancient Greek language itself is fundamental to perceiving these things in the way that they're meant to be perceived. And Maria Maragou, who's a researcher and author that I'm working with in Greece, has spent her life studying like deep etymological studies of ancient Greek texts. And she describes it as a cosmic codex that enables you to conjure up magic and to change reality and to see things as they truly are. And I think the more I was I just said to Lee that hanging out with a lot of Greek speakers and people that are really into ancient Greek study makes me feel like English is German because it seems too basic and too simple. And the Greek language seems to somehow express the essence of things in a more effective way somehow. I think because we obviously have so many Greek words in English, it's like getting to the source, getting to the root of everything by understanding the ancient terms for
Mhm.
things.
Absolutely. Just while I'm thinking of this, are you aware of the original Greek theta? What it looked like?
I'm not sure. What does the original Greek theta look like?
You're going to be pleasantly surprised. This is what the original Greek theta was.
Oh, amazing.
Right. So if you then take the numerical value of theta, which is 9, but then you spell the word theta, you end up with the same amount, exactly the same value as Helios. And of
Mm.
course, Helios is the sun. So the Greek word theta takes you straight directly to the actual value of Helios itself, of which it was the original glyph of.
Wow. Yeah, you spoke about how the Greek letters had numerical values and they were symbols to represent numerical values. So
Yeah.
that gives Greek this extra layer of complexity, and it basically is the fabric of the universe. And that's how Maria describes it. She's very passionate about the ancient Greek language.
Well, I mean, like for example, I mean, a lot of people, know about Kabbalah and the Hebrew Kabbalah and things like this, and they even use terms like gematria. Well, gematria, for a start, is a Greek word. So gematria is literally related to the idea of the geometria, the metric, the measurement of Gaia. So the
Mm.
Gaia metria, or the geometric. So the whole idea is that we've got here specific, as you say there, a matrix, which is made from the numerical values of words. And of course, the ancient priests used to know, and the priestesses and all of the ancient hierarchies of the priestly castes would basically utilize that whenever the formula of a god would change, they would change its spelling because its spelling would then reflect what they were trying to describe. And a classic example of that is Mithras. So they changed the Mithras from 360 and then stuck a letter eta in there. Uh, is it eta? Eta, yeah, which equals 5. And then it became Mithras with 365 to describe the new understanding of the 365 days that they were now willing to actually espouse um, to the general public, which originally in Egypt that was the 5 forbidden days, I do believe.
Mm. Wow. How do you think that hypnotism, mesmerism, magnetism fits into the practices at sleep temples in the ancient world? Like, I'll be interested to hear more about your idea about sleep temples in Egypt as well, for example, because Imhotep often gets credited with being, well, he's syncretized with Asklepios in some of the sleep temples in Egypt. But I was wondering what you made of that.
Well, I think a lot of the feeling is that it has actually a lot of that tradition of the sleep temples did derive from Egypt. To me, a lot of the rites and rituals that surround the books of the dead, to me, are actually it seems quite clear to me, and of course these things cannot be proven, but it's certainly something which you can gain your own understanding of by actually going through. Sorry, there's somebody outside staring into my car, which is a bit
Sounds
weird.
very Glastonbury.
Sorry, it's very strange. Yeah. So anyway, yeah. So you've got the whole thing with the way the temples are set up, and of course, if you've been to Egypt and you've been into the Great Pyramid and you've been into a lot of the other temples, there's a distinct feeling that these places were used not just for funerary rites by any stretch of the imagination. They were used very much as initiatic chambers, and I very much feel that that some of these places were used for preparations in a similar way to the Asclepian temple, to the Abaton. I
You,
mean, of course, there's been a lot said about Imhotep in this regard as well.
well, it seems like Imhotep is a divine physician, and I think it's always interested me that he also has this role of divine scribe, because the relationship between magic, medicine, and writing is always so important in ancient Egypt.
Yeah,
And Imhotep is syncretized with Asclepius, like officially in the Greco-Roman period, and then
yeah,
in somewhere like the sanctuary of Asclepius at Epidavros, for example, you have the sanctuary of the Egyptian gods there, where you have syncretization between Apollo, Aegea, and
mm,
Asclepius and Aegea, Isis, Horus, and Osiris.
yeah.
So there's something about the resurrection, which is another interesting thing to get onto, because there's this close relationship in Egypt and in Greece between death and sleep. And I think the hypnotic trance state is this liminal space
Mm,
where
mhm.
death and sleep can be coerced in some way. So I wonder how you use hypnosis to influence the sleep process, the dream content, things like this.
Well, really, I mean, the point is, I mean, in if you're talking about the hypnagogic stuff being used to access aspects of awareness that are not usually accessed, um, we can begin to find answers to questions. So it can be used therapeutically in that way. So we can begin to obviously, like good meditation, you can get into a very similar state where you can access answers to questions in a way that you just quite simply normally never would. Um, and they can just pop straight up into your mind, or in a very clear and lucid way, or they can come up in the form of a feeling or in the form of an image. There's many multifarious ways that that these things can present themselves to you. Um, Also, another thing that I lead people to pay attention to is also the feeling that people get. Also, to understand where they feel it, because of course the body registers things in many different areas, many different ways. So it's all of this at the end of the day. When I'm using these things purely therapeutically, it's just to help the client with an immediate issue that they're dealing with. But I I also work in a much more sort of initiatic way as well, and that's really the bit of my work that I can see taking place to the end of my life. Because there's, as you said at the beginning of this interview, I think before everybody joined us, that you can never really see that ending. When navigating the path of the soul, basically that's what we're doing, just navigating the path of the soul and finding the best way under the guidance of certain deities like Hygieia. Obviously, we want a very healthy process. We also need Apollo brings us, harmony and peace. So we want to invoke these ideas, or at least bring through petition, bring these qualities into our journey while whenever we're opening a new door.
Well, I think there's something really useful and intelligent about having a deity as I think of it as almost being like a psychic target. It gives you something to direct your energy and your attention to,
Yeah.
and I think there's this ancient idea that statues can really contain the living essence of a god
Yeah.
or goddess. And I love that idea. And I think that perhaps is conjured up by human attention. If we give form, if we give shape to these these ideas and these qualities of nature, or these forces of nature, and we sculpt them into physical forms, especially human tangible physical forms, then
Mm.
we can direct our energy and our attention and our love
Mm.
and adoration to them, and they then, a bit like a tulpa, like a,
Yeah.
they can come alive and they can then have influence. We've created something in the imagination that then has a life and volition of its own. So, and this is why I think, quite in ancient times, very often the ancient religions, or people that practiced in ancient religions, had this appreciation that things could be transferred, these essences could be transferred from Osiris to Mithras, for example, or from Dionysus to Jesus. And I think we spoke before we came online about one of the things that attracts me so much to Greece is, I think the essence of nature worship is still preserved in Greek
Yeah.
Orthodoxy to some extent. Obviously, Greek Orthodoxy isn't perfect, but neither was paganism. And Maria Maragou did mention something to me about how the Hierophants, the people who initiated people at the mysteries of Elefsina, for example, they took when the sites were being smashed up and demolished by early Christian fanatics, they were continuing to initiate people in Plato's academy, and they preserved those rites. And then, because they had a high status in society, they were able to insert those rites and those rituals and those religions, or those rituals, into Greek Orthodoxy. So, for example, Easter in Greece is such a big deal. It has this real kind of Dionysian
Hmm.
sense to it.
Hmm.
And so many of the chapels, especially the rural chapels and churches, are dedicated to the Virgin Mary. And very
Yeah.
often they have like special qualities of the Virgin Mary. So it'll be like the painless sleep, or meaning the death, the Assumption of the Virgin. And so they're often still associated with things like dream incubation as well. I think the biggest um, or one of the earliest churches in Greece was actually built within the sanctuary of Asklepios, and it became famous for dream miracles,
Hmm.
because there was always these overlapping of religions and cults kind of being aware that they were essentially saying the same thing, and so you could swap one face of a god for another, and
Yeah.
no one really batted an eyelid. So
Yeah.
I think that that's something that Greece, to me, that current of ecstasy and nature adoring is still there. And I think for me, that is the biggest sense I get spending time in Elefsina as well,
Mm.
actually, is
Mm.
that uh, if you ever go during springtime, I'm sure you've been at springtime, when all the wildflowers are coming out, you
Yeah.
get this sense that for rural agrarian populations, the emergence of spring would have just been ecstatic. It's like orgiastic
Yeah.
nature. And if
Mm.
you feel that you're part of the cycle of nature, you feel orgiastic. They call it the sacred orgies as well. And I think it's more than just um, about sex. It's about like the sex of the world, the sex of the
Yeah.
cosmos, and that there's a current that human beings are able to tap into and become ecstatic.
Yeah, and that's interesting. You using that word orgy. I mean the actual meaning of that word as well means the working, the orgia is the actual working itself. So the working of nature, or the great work, again, it's another one of those references. Um, yeah. So the thing of the how to use this um is a very interesting question, because like I say, initiatically, I like to use these things to incubate the next phase of a question, which is interesting. The word quest. You're on the quest. You're asking the question. You're setting out on the quest. You're positing the question. And of course, like when we read the tarot, or when we do any kind of divination, we usually have some form of a question that we need an answer to. But if you're actually working the sacred work, you obviously need answers to certain, or usually directives in some way, or some kind of hint as to what you need to be looking at next, or what you need to be paying more attention to, or the stricture of rites themselves actually allow you to pay attention to say, for example, I'll just give you an off-the-cuff example here. But if, say, for example, you light a certain amount of candles, and you know that those candles represent certain principles, and you do a meditation with those particular candles, if you know how a certain candle is behaving, then that candle can obviously give you the clue as to what it is that what you're being told while you're doing the meditation. So if one of the candles, for example, goes very, very dim and very, very small, or is very, very wavery, and the rest of them are very still and strong, and you know the significance of that particular candle, then you're doing divination immediately in the process of working with the strictures of a rite, for example. So, but then of course, taking the dreaming, you're saying the dreaming, it can take on another level whereby when you go into some of the deeper works where you're completely deprived of any light whatsoever, that you actually begin to dream with your eyes open, of course, because you're looking straight into the dark. And when you're doing this, then of course you can form dialogues while apparently still awake with things which come to, say, for example, visit you, or you can you can begin to start seeing something emerging. These things are very difficult to talk about.
Well, you're in the right
You
place to
can
talk.
begin to get an idea of what good. Yeah.
You're in the
So
right place to talk about
yeah.
them. Yeah.
So this is basically, in my understanding, this is precisely what they were doing in the Abaton, because they were the particular area of the Abaton, they were prepping people for a period of time, almost like in a hospital bed type situation, where they would immerse them in tasks like reading about a particular deity, immersing themselves in the literature of that particular deity, immersing themselves in repetitive forms of prayer or whatever. And I get a very strong feeling that this was all done on lunar cycles in strict accordance with lunar cycles. And one of the most powerful lunar cycles of all is the lunar cycle between Libra right through to Capricorn. That particular quadrant, or should I say that those four, forming a nice inside the 360 degrees of a zodiac, they're forming a nice 90-degree angle. Those four, from Libra to Capricorn, is where all of the initiatic stuff happens. And through time and history, that's very much been the case, because of course you have the epiphania in the Capricorn.
Well, that's interesting, because doesn't that also correspond with Orpheus as a constellation as well? Because that's the representation of Asklepios in the heavens.
Absolutely. Absolutely. There you go. Absolutely that. And of course you get the judgment in the Libra, and you get the resurrection or the birth of the light in Capricorn.
You mentioned meditating on some of the objects in the British Museum, and I had a similar situation because I spend a lot of time at the Sanctuary of Asklepios when I take my retreat guests there. So as I was saying to you before we started, it feels like home to me now. I'm there so often, always having a little lie down in the Avaton. And what I love about it is that the staff, the whistleblowers, are pretty much only orientated around the theatre and a bit in the museum. But once you get into the bigger, wider sanctuary, because the theatre was a huge, important part of treatment in the Asclepia, because theatre was seen as divine. It was an art of Dionysus, and Dionysus is a god of kind of purging and ecstasy. And you could go through a process of catharsis by watching an emotional drama being played out in this theatre. And you have to think of theatres, I think, as temples, as shrines, like something divine and transformative. happens in them. So, but when tourists get dropped off at the Sanctuary of Asclepius now, they just get dropped off at the Great Theatre. They might spend 10 or 20 minutes in the museum, and then that's it. And then there's this whole vast sanctuary just beyond that, that is where the bathhouses were, where the various temples to different gods were, and where this dormitory where people would go to sleep and have sacred sleep or divine dreams. And so I've been very interested in this idea of sacred sleep and enkymesis, what it actually means, and looking at it etymologically. Enkymesis means something like being put to sleep in a particular place. So
Right.
there is the act of falling asleep or being put to place in a put to sleep in a particular place, and the place is important because obviously something is anticipated by sleeping in a particular place. And
Yeah.
so I think this idea of divine dreaming and sacred sleep is something that's super ancient, that Stone Age people were
Yeah.
doing. They were sleeping
Yeah.
in
Absolutely.
caves to contact the the spirit of the earth. And it
Absolutely.
eventually became more and more complex. And as we were saying when we were talking beforehand, the entire Sanctuary of Asclepius, which is a very sophisticated, holistic healing sanctuary. And I don't think you can overstate how holistic it was. It had libraries, gymnasiums,
Mm.
um,
Mm. Mm.
uh, bathhouses of every kind, like great food. There were diet regimens organized for people. And the Divine Dream was the kind of culmination of all of this work done to get the body in a healthy state as possible to receive this information from the god. So
Mm.
I slept on this as well, and in my dream, I was in the Avaton, and in my dream, I had this understanding that there was the Avaton, which was where they actually performed surgeries and where you only went if you were having a surgery, because obviously we know they were performing actual surgeries because we found scalpels and needles
Mm.
and
Mm.
all
Mm.
of the kind of genuine surgeon gear that you would associate with actual surgeries and operations. And there are records of surgeries happening, even sex changes and things like this. So the Avaton in my dream was where they did all these secret things. The physicians were actually performing these physical operations that the ordinary members of the public, the ordinary pilgrims, weren't to see. So the Avaton means a place that no one can go into. It's like the sacred inner sanctum, but it means you can't tread there. No one can tread there. You can't step foot upon in this sacred place. And then the Enkymeterion is the place where you would go to sleep and have your divine dreams of Asclepius. And one of the people I've been talking to is a classicist and philologist, was saying that he thinks enkymesis describes this idea of sacred sleep, describes sleep, the kind of quality of sleep that you have when you're put under anesthetic. And it's the groggy visions and hallucinations that you have as you're waking up. And they're almost certainly using anesthetics in the Asclepia, I would say, because the use of things like mandrake, diurnal, poison
Right.
ryegrass has been well known since the ancient Near East. So, but in my dream, let's get back to that.
Mhm.
One of the things that we shouldn't rule out or shouldn't forget about when we think about the Sanctuary of Asclepius is that these serpents were allowed to roam freely around, and they were considered to be the animal form of the god. Serpents and dogs were the animal
Mm.
form of Asclepius. And in my dream, the serpents were trained serpents, and they could smell you, and they could smell where there were wounds or diseases on you. And in most of the imagery that you see from the sanctuaries, the
Mhm.
serpents do look very friendly. They look very tame, and they're all over you. And I was having this experience as being a dream pilgrim of that time, that attention that you're receiving from the serpents gives them this extra sense of consciousness, awareness of divinity, because they're interested in me. A snake would normally be scared of a human, but these snakes are all over you and smelling you. And snakes do have extraordinary olfactory capabilities, even
Yeah.
more so than dogs. They have this thing called a Jacobson's organ on the roof of their
Oh,
mouth.
right.
So they're breathing in like complex smells and are able to identify billions of different smells. And so I think it would be quite sensible that you would have trained serpents. I mean, there was an extra bit of my dream.
Mm.
You were talking about there was an extra bit of your dream where the priests in my dream were feeding the serpents slithers of organs that they'd cut out of some of their patients. So I'm not
Oh.
sure if that was real. But in the dream, it was saying that this was somehow transmuting the illness of the patient and making it good and whole by being
Mm.
absorbed by the god. But anyway, I think it's
Mm.
really interesting to sleep and dream on these things. And I always, if there's something I'm puzzling over, or I have a query about these practices in ancient times, that's my favorite activity to do. Because, like you say, we never really know, but it's interesting to try to access ideas in altered states, and dreams are the perfect place to do this, especially.
Absolutely, and I do feel that being inspired by a vision while sitting looking at a piece of art, or sitting looking at a statue, or sitting looking at a particular carving, or a place, even purely natural places, natural settings. Um, these are not to be passed by. These are not experiences to be passed by. They're no less meaningful than the things you would get in actual, what you might call actual dream, what people think of as ordinary dream state, where we have a lot of symbolism taking place. There's a lot of things that can come to us, like for example, standing at the Hathor Bowl, for example, and the things that came to me there, and many other places. Um, yeah, they're not things to be just taken lightly. They're by themselves. There's a lot of symbolism there, a lot of really useful symbolism that tells you a lot. So I really like what you've just said about the snakes. Definitely.
Well, I
Yeah.
think there's also something about great art, this idea of being struck by the muse in ancient Greece as well, I find very interesting.
Mm,
And my muse, my patron goddess is Mnemosyne. And I think because she's the mother of all of the muses, and she's described as a personification of divine remembrance, she's kind of a psychopomp in the Orphic
mm,
tradition.
mm, mm.
And she, to me, is the personification of lucidity, because she's remembering yourself in the great dream, and there's a kind of inspiration and ecstasy that comes to you in a dream that I think Mnemosyne is the muse of. She's the muse of that kind of inspiration, which we've kind of ironically forgotten about. So the fact that she was such an important goddess as well in the sleep temple traditions quite often is
Mm.
significant, I think. And she also represents this, her opposite is Lethe, the goddess of oblivion, the
Mm.
goddess of
Yeah.
forgetting. And I think there's something to be said though, like hypnosis is a great example of this relationship between Lethe and Mnemosyne, I think, because if you look at the Oracle of Trophonius, for example, it was
Mm.
this last resort oracle that people would visit if they had a problem or they wanted to know something. But there's something interesting for me about the fact that to drink the waters of oblivion first, and there's something that reminds me of hypnosis in that, especially if you're practicing hypnosis in order to cure
Absolutely.
someone of a phobia, they need to forget their patterns and their
Yeah.
programming before and remember like their divine source and the divine nature of their being.
Right, yeah, absolutely. And so in a similar way to Isis and the function of Isis in the remembering of Osiris, that's the Mnemosyne type of view as well. It's like that's the function of the goddess, piecing back that which is scattered, gathering it all back together again, which is forming a holism again, which is the very meaning of the healing that takes place. So by actually forming that, by bringing the healing that's necessary, the trajectory of the soul remembers where it's from. And that's the point, is that we are fragmented. Humanity, the state of ordinary humanity, is generally fragmented and in great pain as a result of the forgetting, the
Mm.
lethe, that you were talking about. So that's actually, yeah, the forgetting and the fragmentation is actually another way to look at it, is the fact that it's this state of blindness that the majority of the human race are in, while they're desperately trying to remember their divine source.
Yeah, I guess, I mean, the mysteries of Elefsina are often described as, dying before you die and
Yeah,
releasing that fear of death. And there are some initiatory qualities definitely within the
for
sanctuary of
sure.
Asclepius. I think the sacred sleep, the divine dreaming
Yeah,
itself is a form of initiation. And if you look at, so the kind of companion sometimes described as the son of Asclepius is Telesphorus, and he
yeah.
is bringer of fulfillment, and he represents completion of the cure. And it is, like you say, this return to wholeness, this perfecting of the human organism and the human soul. And I guess that this is what's missing from the NHS, really, isn't it? This concept of the soul. They could do with thinking in a much more holistic way. Like, I think that understanding that beauty can have a healing effect is
Yeah, yeah,
so important. And when you do visit the site, say the Sanctuary of Asclepius, and any of these Asclepia, because there were so many, there's like 400 in the ancient Greek world, like across Europe. There's even a sleep temple in England, in Gloucestershire. That there's this appreciation for beauty, and these sites were always chosen because they had a lot of natural beauty. They had natural
yeah,
spring water. There was this Hellenic understanding of feng shui, I think, that
yeah,
these things have an effect. And you look at some of the structures at the Sanctuary of Asclepius as well. For example, the Thymeli, the great tholos that was built there, the most
yeah,
expensive building ever built in the Peloponnese,
yeah,
is exquisitely built. Like, it's extremely beautiful. And I think, like you say, beauty and inspiration and appreciating great art is connecting somehow to this divine resonance, because those great works of art, or those great efforts of incredible craftsmanship, they were made by inspired people. And when inspired people make things, you feel it in your body and soul, and that can
mhm,
heal you.
mhm. Yeah,
And
yeah,
so I think, music is obviously very important, and the arts were very important in the Sanctuary of Asclepia. There would have been great art competitions and drama competitions, and the mysteries of Elefsina incorporated Asclepius into the greater mysteries. They had the Feast of Asclepius Day. So it was recognized that your sick self died basically in the abbot,
yeah.
and your
Right.
healthy self was reborn.
Right. Yes, exactly. And that like we were saying, the Apollonian type of invocation to bring that energy in is to reharmonize and to bring temperance back into the being. And that's basically, reestablishing the principle of Ma'at in the old Egyptian
Mm.
theology. So you're
Yeah,
actually bringing that back again.
interesting you mentioned Mark. And I think there's also something about when you create, because the feeling that I get when I go to the Sanctuary of Asclepius is that it's a divine enclosure. It's a sacred precinct. It's encircled by this sacred grove. And there's something about, once you pass through that sacred grove, you're in divine territory, and
Yeah.
everything there is perfect. And in ancient times, you can imagine that everything was perfect. The buildings were perfect, the waterways were perfect, the water was perfectly clear and pure. There was harmonious music playing. There were therapeutai. There were treatments to get you back to full health. And there's something about that reminds me of that. I think it was like a experiment in addiction, where you put rats into an environment that's enriched and full of beautiful things and nice food and healthy things and entertaining games, and they will give up being addicted to crack or whatever the scientists have put them on, because that's what scientists do. And I think it's true that if you're in a beautiful, harmonious environment, you become more beautiful and harmonious.
Yeah.
And I think that ancient people understood that. And perhaps that comes from this less egotistical, individualistic way of seeing the world. Because if you place any organism into a beautiful environment, then you tend to calibrate somehow to that environment, because there's always interaction and conversation and communication happening between the different organisms and the organizational forces in that space. So I think that that is something that ancient Greeks were consciously trying to do when they were creating these healing sanctuaries.
I couldn't agree more. I couldn't agree more. Yeah, there's definitely that sense of it. Yeah, definitely that sense of it. Yeah, and another thing as well is at Alephsis, when I was there the last time, it was so clear to me that when you see all of the different elements of the space, you've got the cave of Hades, you've got the Colicron. Is it Colicron? The well? I
Yeah.
don't know how you say it. The Colicron well, where you had Demeter, and Persephone. And then you've got the Telesterion over there, and everything in the immediate zone is literally no more than a minute's walk from each place. So there's this incredible feeling that there was just a huge psychodrama that would have happened in that immediate space. And all of those spaces were used by actual people going through those, reenacting those myths,
Mm.
basically.
Yeah, I think it's one of my favorite archaeological sites there, because one thing that I think is really interesting that I noticed they haven't done in a lot of the archaeological sites is they've maintained the sacred way. So the
Mm.
way that you enter the archaeological site is along the original sacred way, and it
Sacred
gives you
way,
this
that's right.
amazing sense of entering it. So when you enter the Asclepia, you enter it in a completely wrong
Yeah,
place. But
yeah.
there's something about Elefsina that you enter it on the
In
sacred
the
way
right
as a
way.
pilgrim
Yeah,
would have done, and I love that. And you
yeah,
get this immediate sense, like you know where you're going, like the
yeah.
flow through the space is incredible.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So yeah, all of these places still have a hell of a lot to give to us. That's absolutely for certain.
And how do you think, does Mesmer claim that mesmerism is deriving from ancient Egyptian practices of magnetism?
Well, no, I don't think Mesmer claimed that. But in my opinion, from seeing plenty of evidence of Egyptian, the centers, there was a very strong emphasis upon actual centers within the human body, which are there within certain glowing discs, which are placed in certain statues or in the, say, for example, the body of Nut often has these centers. There's also another image that I have where you have Isis, Osiris, and Horus, and they're all in a line, and they're doing the usual Egyptian postures. But
Mm.
those Egyptian postures, we think of them often as like, oh, there is the priest, doing or the priestess doing an act of worship. But it's very often overlooked that they're actually in the posture of magnetic transmission. It's really clear to me. Also, when you see them magnetizing the specific centers in the body in some of these images, it becomes even more clear. They're working with very specific centers in some of these images.
Well, I think the West, for example, like Peter Kingsley talks a lot about there being a tradition not unlike Indian sages transmitting wisdom that
Mm,
happened for Hellenic philosophers, but that it kind of got lost. And there's a tradition where healing really is similar to what we might look at when we look at shamanic healing. It actually looks very similar to shamanic healing.
mm,
And that there was an idea of chakras or energy centers within the body in ancient Greece, but that those things, because they're represented different, don't get recognized as being chakras or don't get recognized. I mean, even with Egyptian concepts of the heart is quite interesting, because the heart is seen as the seat of the soul. It encloses the car and the bar. It's where the intellect resides, even. And I think the ancient Egyptian word translates as something like skull offal. They knew that the brain did stuff. They knew that the brain was important. And if anyone had a brain injury, they knew that they couldn't do certain things because they had a brain injury. But they didn't see it as being like the seat of emotions or the seat
mm,
of inspiration and ideas or love. They saw the heart as being more important there. And then you have this concept of union as well in ancient Egypt. The Smar Tawe hieroglyph that shows the heart and windpipe uh,
mm, mm, mm.
entwined,
Yeah,
and there's this, I guess, like there's a concept in Egypt similarly as there is in Greece of this ideal person, this harmonized person, usually a man, but there's a sense of like a harmony of um the forces within a person, and usually the ideal man is humble. It's the same in Egypt as it is in Greece, that the ideal man is a humble
mm,
person and that he
yeah,
has his tempers in check, and that can be achieved, it seems like it's achieved through some form of meditation or some form of non-ordinary practice of an exercise in consciousness.
yeah. Absolutely, yes, yes. Well, again, once again, it's very much about consciousness itself and conscious awareness. I think we just got a message
Oh
there.
yeah. I'm gonna ask anyone if they want any questions at this point
Ah,
as well.
yes,
So
okay, good.
that might be quite good. Lucan said, are there any written sources where we can read up on the sleep temples and possibly even the connection with Mesmer?
Right, okay. To my knowledge, I haven't come across any external satisfactory materials where we can learn about the actual sleep temples, other than it mentioned scattered throughout a few different books. There have been books written on hypnosis. I unfortunately can't remember the name of those at the moment, where the Asclepian sleep temples are mentioned, and also this connection we're talking about with Imhotep. So I'm pretty sure if you do a Google search or something on the internet, you'll come across which books feature this material quite easily. Yeah, sorry, I
There's a
can't give you
there's a
immediate.
few books on sleep temples that Jill Remberg wrote a kind of exhaustive tome that costs about 500 quid, but you can get a PDF of it online. And that looks at evidence across the Greco-Roman world for any sleep temple ever, where dreams may come. I can send out anyone who wants to know like a reading list of anything that relates to
Yeah.
dream temples because I've tried to find everything. But as far as I'm aware as well, there's nothing that links mesmer and sleep temple practices.
No, I think the most interesting thing is the fact that through the Pythagorean tradition, Mesmer is more closely related to the Pythagorean tradition than people think.
Hmm.
So you have mm, the whole idea of the harmony. In fact, his own society was called the Society of Harmony. So he was working with that whole idea of harmonization with the Apollonian principles, and actually to a large extent, the Pythagorean tradition also had connections with the Therapeutae.
Yeah.
So they were very, very closely linked. Never
Steph
mind, never
asked,
mind the fact that actually Pythagoras was supposed to have brought the knowledge from Egypt originally as
yeah.
well.
Stefan asked, the UK sleep temple is in Lydney Park. Yes, Lydney Park in Gloucestershire, dedicated to the god Nodens,
That's
and
it.
was worked on by Tessa and Mortimer Wheeler, were the archaeologists working on it, and they were assisted by Tolkien, who used it as inspiration for writing Lord of the Rings.
Yeah, that's right.
It's on like a private estate that is only open for a couple of weeks out of the year for a rhododendron festival, Lydney Park Estate. What Darren says, what is the most important single practice we can implement to learn to sense magnetic energy and or experience waking dream experiences, and where can we learn about this?
Okay, so I myself do specialist courses in precisely these techniques. The next one I have on is on the, let me see, the 25th to the 30th of October this year. That'll be taking place in Glastonbury. And if you go to www.arcanatherapies.com, so that's all one word, arcanatherapies.com, you'll see more information about that course and how to book onto it. So with regards to these techniques, it's very much based in the I'll just answer that question seeing as it's popped up. Yes, I still do British Museum tours. You can go on arcanaevents.com and you can book onto those. Um, yeah, so as I was saying, the actual way you actually enter into this energy is through present moment awareness. So we do a lot of training in present moment awareness, and once that we've actually started charging and supercharging the energy, it's then very easy to start using it. So that's very much what it is. And also we can find that it has a great amplifying effect upon our relationship to other things in the natural landscape and with other bodies of any kind, other people, animals, trees, rocks, springs, and so on.
You know, this reminds me a little bit of, actually, I remember one of our early interactions. I was reading Knowledge of the Higher Worlds by Rudolf Steiner.
Oh, yes,
And
yes.
one of the exercises in that, and this reminds me a lot of what you're saying about energy emanating from things,
Mm,
is to identify the energy that are coming from living and dead things, and you become sensitive to
yes.
things that are dead and things that are living or have a charge, and it becomes very strong after a while. And I was trying to explain to someone what the sense is, because you just do this practice where you sit with something, say a plant that's very obviously alive and a plant that's very obviously dead, and you feel the difference in the energetic field of it, and then you become more sensitive to it, and you're able to like walk down a street, for example. One of the things I noticed was that if you're walking down a street where some people have gardens and some people have drives, it's like alive, 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 dead, 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 alive, alive. And the feeling is like, um, it's a sensation, but I would describe the sense as being quite close to hearing. It's like really, it's an interesting, because he talks as well about
Yes.
cultivating your organs of sensory perception, which I found really interesting. So, and he talks about, the more you cultivate these organs, the more you're able to see these different spiritual realms. I love the way that Steiner writes about these things. I mean, he was a real visionary, I think, in terms of he had this absolute sense of how to communicate these things to people, and exactly what he wanted to say. Do you think that the experience of sensing magnetism, is that something similar to that?
Very much. Very, very much. Yes. And like I say, from doing certain exercises, you can begin to come into direct contact with that very, very quickly. So it's something that I'm quite directive with people when we do courses, and I make sure I keep an eye on every single person so that I can keep giving them the necessary prods that they need to stay completely conscious of what's happening to them in all the time. So we
Mm.
just keep driving that process until eventually you begin to feel it.
Will says, how can hypnosis best be used to enhance one's lucid dream practice?
Right. Well, there's the famous Castanada's "find your hands in a dream" technique. Now, of course, I mean you can reinforce with what I call traditional hypnosis, which is usually involving not non-verbal but verbal suggestions, such as "Tonight I will find my hands in a dream." Tonight I will find my hands in a dream. It will be easy and natural for me to do so. And you just basically make suggestions before you go to bed. You might even just sit there on a park bench one day when you've got a few relaxing minutes to yourself and just take a few deep breaths and just repeat to yourself, tonight I will find my hands in a dream. In the beginning, when I was doing lucid dreaming, I found this to be the most simple, straightforward, really super simple method. Um, it took a little while, maybe a couple of weeks, but as soon as I literally found my hands in the dream, so I will find my hands in the dream. I will look at my hands, and when I see my hands, I will know that I am dreaming, and I will say to myself, I know that I am dreaming. Once that you've done that, and I'll give you one example of a time when that happened to me. Um, I was grabbing hold of a rock. I was grabbing hold of a very, very hard, bristly rock. It seemed like some sort of bubbly volcanic rock with lots of sharp edges. So it was even going as far as to say, I'm really making it so obvious that this material underneath your hands is like painful for you to hold. And as I was doing it, I'm actually looking at my hands gripping the rock, and I'm actually properly beginning to observe my hands. And then as a result of that, you start to look around you and you can change colors. You can start to mess around with like different parameters of colors and sizes of things. And once that you're on that trajectory, if you can keep that going, then you can enter into some really, really quite fun spaces.
I think we're always kind of hypnotizing ourselves in terms of programming our dream content. It's about making conscious decisions about what you want in there. I have a lot of people come to my dream things that watch loads of horror movies, and then they're like, "Oh, I don't know why I have nightmares all the time." But you know, the more the things that I always say, watch Holy Mountain, Jodorowsky's Holy Mountain, if you want to have these
Of
dreams, because
course,
it's like
yes.
It's a psycho magic quest through the major arcana, and
Yeah.
it's just perfect dream fodder. It's so graphic, so colorful, so visually like a um extraordinary that you just can't help but process that you in your dreams. And I have thought that, a lot of these psychodramas that would have happened at Elefsina or at the Sanctuary of Asclepius may have been processed most deeply in the dream state, because that is the dream food, the experiences that we have in our everyday waking life. The statues of the gods can come alive in our dreams, and they will come alive in our dreams, because if we're seeing serpents writhing around on the floor, we're likely to incorporate them into our dreams at some point. And one of the I mean, I use a form of sleep hypnosis, a guided hypnagogic meditation, when I take people to the Sanctuary of Asclepius to imagine themselves in that place in ancient times, and to try to seed hypnagogia with some of these symbols and images and ideas of the god. And obviously it works very effectively if you're actually there. But I think that one of the things that is really good as a practice is that learning to expand, extend, and become more aware of hypnagogia, so that you can navigate it and find yourself in a dream proper without ever really losing consciousness. Like, I always describe it like Alice falling down the rabbit hole in Alice in Wonderland. Like, you're kind of drifting through hypnagogia, and the dream is the corridor at the bottom of the tunnel. And one of the things that I think works really well as well, and it's something that I think was incorporated into a lot of ancient oracles, is any sounds of nature that form this kind of background from which you can start to hear murmurings and sounds, like running, trickling water.
Oh
It's really
yes,
good. You can
yes.
start to hear oracles if you listen to trickling water, or you listen to some kind of hubbubby noise in the background. There's something
Absolutely.
about it that seems to provoke it's a bit like a kind of audio version of pareidolia. When you start to see faces in things, you start to hear
Yeah, yeah.
voices. Sometimes when I do yoga nidra and I use a recording to do yoga nidra, the voice in the recording turns into like a dream dialogue, and I'm conscious of the fact that there's this yoga nidra audio track that I'm listening to, but there's also this dream dialogue that's happening simultaneously, and it's like my brain is making new forms out of
Mhm.
this background material.
Absolutely. Very, very good. You mentioned about making things out of, say, for example, there's one really interesting event that happened to me a couple of years ago. It was about 3 years ago. I was actually in Germany, and I was literally out in the Bavarian mountains. Just decided to do a little bit of divination on a map. Where would be a really important place to go? Where is a particular place that will act like a bit of a portal, that we can start to access something. So did a little bit of divination over the map, and lo and behold, this one place the pendulum kept getting drawn to this one place, and then selected the part because it was a paper map, and then went into Google Earth and got closer and closer and found the actual place that it was pointing to was a place called Kalderbrunnen. Kalderbrunnen, which means in German means cold spring. And I thought, oh right, so it's actually landed on a cold spring. So in reality, going to this particular place and then walking up through these mountain tracks, got completely lost. Didn't know. But then the pendulum said, out of these forks, this way. So went this way, and ended up coming across this strange little sort of stack of bricks in the middle of a absolutely perfectly natural place where a stack of bricks looked completely out of place. But it was a well cover on the side of a really steep, tall Bavarian mountain. And I could sit on the top of this well, and you could hear the waters underneath. And the sunlight was the wind was blowing in the trees, and it gave you that sort of dappled, breezy light over your eyelids. And then you had all of the sound of the wells in stereo. And as you sat there, it started to sound like chime bars. And then it turned into these amazing, amazing visions of like literally like double helixes in golden and fiery golden light, and then the sounds were in stereo. It started to sound like an angelic choir.
Wow.
So it really was quite an incredible place. And there was another peculiar thing that happened at that particular point where, for a period of at least an hour afterwards, it felt like the world was upside down somehow.
Mm. Yeah, I mean, it's interesting to me, like how easy it can be to access these altered states, especially if you take away the distractions of modern life. I think that one issue so many people have is addiction to devices or looking at their phones or feeling like they're a slave to their clock or their calendar. And healing occurs when you're removed from these environments. Like I always joke with the people that come on my retreats, they're held in the healing lands of Asklepios, and it's amazing how people will recover from things that have plagued them for ages. And I think the biggest part of it is just removing them from a noisy, distracting world. And like yourself, Epidavros is incredibly quiet, incredibly still. And I have thought as well, because it's Greece is quite volcanic, and I think in these countries where you feel volcanic energies, pulses in the earth, much
Mm,
greater sense of the earth as being a living being,
totally, totally.
and the sense of the tide coming in and out as being a breath and a pulse. And it's so much more tangible in those volcanic places. And I think this is part of the reason why so much philosophy and so much wisdom comes from these countries that are volcanic, is because they had this much more first-hand experience of the earth being a living being that was
Absolutely.
sustaining them through heat, through water, through life.
Yeah. Any more
Right.
questions?
Sam says there are many occult schools where the practitioner beams some sort of astral influence into someone's aura. Is there anything that makes mesmerism unique in this regard? Like, how might it differ from, say, something like Shaktipat? That's quite, like this guru transmission.
Well, I mean, what you're doing here, really, if you're doing mesmerism proper, is you're actually first of all, you're in yourself working with the principles of harmonization. So you work on the harmonization of the self energetically. And once that you're able to reach that state in the self, as you work with the other, you begin to become very sensitive to what needs balancing and what needs adjusting in the other person. You're not beaming an astral influence into the other person. You're literally forming a lemniscate between the other, and you're actually forming an ability to form a harmonization or bring the other individual into a greater sense of present moment awareness, which of itself is a sense of healing, because we're actually disconnected from ourselves most of the time, or we're too much in our minds or too much in our thoughts, not actually grounded and rooted in the body, receiving the information that the body gives to us. So because it may sound trite to say, but the body speaks to us all the time, and we need to spend more time listening to it. We live in a world where we would rather override what the body's telling us than to listen to it and do what's appropriate. For example, we push ourselves too hard often. And so what we're doing is we're harmonizing the other. We're not necessarily transmitting something into them. Although that can be done. You can use it that way. You can implant things in another person if you want to work that way. But mesmerism proper, just that isn't what it is.
So how do you experience, say, for example, a treatment on someone? Do you have any kind of, is there any visual phenomena? Is it a felt sense? How do you experience it?
Well, actually, there's one really good example of one particular individual who came to one of my courses once, who I was sitting in the break. I think it was after the first day of the course beginning, and we were sitting drinking a cup of tea together. And as I was speaking to him, I knew virtually nothing about his work, nothing about his background, anything like this, and suddenly started to feel a kind of pricking sensation down towards the left-hand side of my throat, at the base of my neck. Um, and I said to him, and it just gave me the immediate impression that I have to say to him, look, sorry to have to stop you here, but I'm getting this pricking sensation at the bottom of my neck. And he just looked at me and said, that's incredible. He said, I've been trying to work on that particular point, and I'm an acupuncturist, and I've been working on that particular point for years trying to get it right. And he'd got like some sort of throat problem that he'd been working on as well, and other forms of emotional blockage that he'd been working on. And during that particular session, we worked on it really, really quickly and got it all cleared out. So, in answer to that question, sometimes you get very, very strong physiological sensations that tell you exactly what's happening. Like, for example, you in yourself, you may get like a very, very strong sense of tension in your solar plexus that tells you that you have to rebalance that within yourself and then send it out to the other, and then get that so that it forms part of the lemniscat again, and you actually get like that energy flowing between the two, and it becomes like a pulse.
Mm. So it's kind of like a feedback mirroring system in some sense, that if you were to, by being in their physical presence, you start to experience their sensations, and by
Yes.
taking them on, you can transmute them somehow.
Yes, yes. And I know that a lot of people in a lot of other healing therapies would say, "Oh my gosh, you're going to be taking on a lot of the other person's problems. You're going to be taking on a lot of the other person's imbalances and so on." Um, and of course, you can, if you wish, do all the traditional cleansing methods. But a practitioner that's really been working for a long time and has actually been working very hard and very sufficiently on their work, um, working with present moment awareness, that itself is actually the harmonizing element and can actually override any need to do any of those cleansing exercises.
That's amazing. Really interesting.
Well,
And
it,
do
it
these
is.
things tend to have like knock-on effects to sleep quality and dream quality? Because I imagine that they may do.
Yes, yes. And this is interesting. This is interesting. This has been a constant source of fascination for me, and also something which I deliberately, on occasions, work in a different way, because when I there are times when I deliberately want to enter the dream world more than I do at other times. And there are times when I know that the dream world is not necessarily the place that's going to get me what I need for that particular point in time either. So what I mean is, like, for example, if you're working a lot with present moment awareness, it tends to evaporate your dreams. Because when you're working a lot with dreams, you tend to be going more into the emotions and your emotional responses to things, and then your internal visions grow, and your connection to these internal visions grow. And it tends to be very emotional because it's very linked to the lunar body. It's very linked to, of course, the lunar body has different levels, but it's linked to the lunar body, especially to the emotional part of the lunar body, which is the vegetative aspect of the self. When you're dealing with present moment awareness, you're actually going more into the bioelectrical field than you are into the magnetic lunar field. So the lunar field tends to be more of the magnetic aspect, linked, of course, to the car. And to some extent as well, on its lower level, linked to the animal body, or the nefesh, as they call it in the Kabbalah. So sometimes you need to come into contact with that. Sometimes it's absolutely necessary. On other occasions, it's appropriate, depending on what kind of work you're doing, to evaporate it. So this is where it becomes quite alchemical, because sometimes you're trying to, you're trying to work in a more wet way. Sometimes you're trying to work in a more dry way.
Great. Does anyone else have any questions? We've been going on for a while now. So thank you so much, Lee, by the way. It's been brilliant. It's been so nice to chat to you again.
Yeah,
It's
well, I
been a long
feel
time.
oddly feel like I'm only just getting.
I know we should. Well,
Yes,
let me know when you're going to do a British Museum thing because I'll be up for coming
absolutely.
here. And then also come and see me in my peach bungalow in Greece as well.
Oh,
I'd love to see you in Epidavros. It'd be
oh
amazing.
yes, of course, of course. Yes, great. Okay. Oh, Darren, fantastic. Thank you. Thank you, Sarah.
My pleasure, as always. Great. Okay. Well, I've recorded this, so I will share it with you, Lee, and share it with anyone else that wants to view it. But thank you so much. We touched on loads of different subjects there, and we went into some areas that I wasn't anticipating we would go, but never mind. Oh, that's good.
Okay. All
Thank you
right
so
then.
much, Lee. It was brilliant.
Bye now.
Cheers. Bye-bye, everyone.